Okay, we're going to be doing number of islands. Make sure you do flood fill before doing this. So you're given an m by n 2D binary grid, which represents a map of ones as characters, or strings but characters, and zeros, which represents water. So the ones represent land, and the zeros represent water. So you're supposed to return the number of islands. An island is surrounded by water and is formed by connecting adjacent lands horizontally or vertically. You may assume all four edges of the grid are all surrounded by water. So this is basically using DFS. We can capture all these ones, right, which are connected. We can capture them using DFS, and then every time we get past them, we convert them to zeros, right, or whichever other figure we want to use, right? And then we'll increment our count. So how do we do this? We initialize the numRows. We initialize the, I call it numRows, right? Number of rows, or the height of the grid. So we initialize the numRows and num columns. So say numRows is equal to length of grid. NumCols is equal to length of grid at index 0. Then we create a helper function to go through all the islands, right? So def, we call it DFS, takes in a row and a column. So at this position within the grid, we check if our position is within range, is within the grid, and also if it hasn't yet been visited, right? In other words, if it is a 1, right, then if it is an island, then we continue checking around. So we say if 0 less than or equal to the row less than the numRows. What this does, it assures that our row number is within the grid, right? And 0 less than or equal to less than or equal to column, which is less than numCols. So this is the column is within the grid, and grid at row column is equal to 1, right? So we found a point in the island. So what we do is we find all the rest, right? So what we do is we set this position to 0 to signify that we've traversed it, right? So grid at row column is equal to 0. Then we find the rest of this island and do the same, right? So how do we do it? We say DFS row column +1 -1 +1 -1, right? If it's not a 1, we simply leave it as it is, right? So now we create a counter for the number of islands, right? So it will be count is equal to 0. Then we go through the grid finding the number of islands. So for row in range, don't forget range, numRows, for C in range num calls. Right, so that's how we traverse through a matrix. If we find a number, if grid at row column is equal to 1, it means we have found a point of an island. So we traverse this island and set it to 0 such that we can count it, such that we do not encounter it again. Right, so we say DFS at RC, right? And then we increase our count plus equals 1. So when we come back here, we simply return count. So what this does is it traverses through here, and whenever it finds a 1, it searches for all the connected portions, sets them to 0, and increments count, right? And then it will come here, it will do the same thing. So this is the solution, and it's O of m by n, where m is the number of rows times number of columns, right? So this is the solution, and thank you, bye.